On December the 21st, 2015, Elon Musk's company SpaceX made history by being one of the first to successfully land a rocket back on Earth after sending it to space. On the same day, Musk, along with Bill Gates and the late Stephen Hawking, was nominated for the 2015 Luddite Award. Despite his groundbreaking technological achievements, Musk was being called out by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, or ITIF, for raising concerns about the unfettered development of AI. Musk, much to the consternation of some, has been and continues to be a vocal critic of unthinking AI development. It's somewhat ironic that Tesla, Musk's electric car company, is increasingly reliant on AI-based technologies to create a fleet of self-driving, self-learning cars. Yet Musk has long argued that the potential future impacts of AI are so profound that great care should be taken in its development, lest something goes irreversibly wrong, like, for instance, the emergence of super-intelligent computers that decide the thing that they really can't stand is people. While some commentators have questioned Musk's motives here, he has a vested interest in developing AI in ways that will benefit his investments. His defense of considered and ethical AI development is in stark contrast to the notion of forging ahead with new innovations without first getting a green light from anyone else. And this leads us to the notion of permissionless innovation. In 2016, Adam Thierer, a member of the MacArthur Center at George Mason University, published a 10-point blueprint for permissionless innovation and public policy. The basic idea behind permissionless innovation is that experimentation with new technologies and business models should generally be permitted by default, and that unless a compelling case can be made for serious harm to society resulting from the innovation, it should be allowed to continue unabated. The concept also suggests that any issues that do arise can be dealt with after the fact. To be fair, Thierer's blueprint for permissionless innovation does suggest that, I quote, policymakers can adopt targeted legislation or regulation as needed to address the most challenging concerns where the potential for clear, catastrophic, immediate, and irreversible harm exists. Yet it still reflects an attitude that scientists and technologists should be trusted and not impeded in their work, and that it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission in technology innovation. And it's some of the potential dangers of this approach to innovation that Ex Machina reveals through the character of Nathan Bateman. Nathan is, in many ways, a stereotypical genius mega entrepreneur. His smarts, together with his being in the right place at the right time and surrounded by the right people, have provided him with incredible freedom to play around with new tech with virtually no constraints. Living in his designer house in a remote and unpopulated area and having hardly any contact with the outside world, he's free to pursue whatever lines of innovation he chooses. No one needs to give him permission to experiment. Without a doubt, there's a seductive lure to being able to play with technology without others telling you what you can and cannot do. And it's a lure that has its roots in our innate curiosity, our desire to know and understand and create. As a lab scientist, I was driven by the urge to discover new things. I was deeply and sometimes blindly focused on designing experiments that worked and that shed new light on the problems I was working on. Above all, I had little patience for seemingly petty barriers that stood in my way. I'd like to think that through my research career, I was responsible. And through my work on protecting human health and safety, I was pretty tuned into the dangers of irresponsible research. But I also remember the times when I pushed the boundaries of what was probably sensible in order to get results. There was one particularly crazy all-nighter while I was working towards my PhD, where I risked damaging millions of dollars of equipment by bending the rules because I needed data, and I didn't have the patience to wait for someone who knew what they were doing to help me. Fortunately, my gambit paid off. It could have easily ended badly, though. Looking back, it's shocking how quickly I sloughed off any sense of responsibility to get the data I needed. This was a pretty minor case of permissionless innovation, but I regularly see the same drive in other scientists, and especially in entrepreneurs, that all-consuming need to follow the path in front of you, to solve puzzles that nag at you, and to make something that works at all costs. This to me is the lure of permissionless innovation. It's something that's so deeply ingrained in some of us that it's hard to resist. But it's a lure that, if left unchecked, can all too often lead to dark and dangerous places. By calling for checks and balances in AI development, Musk and others are attempting to govern the excesses of permissionless innovation. Yet I wonder how far this concern extends, especially in a world where a new type of entrepreneur is emerging who has substantial power to drive to change the face of technology innovation, much as Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are changing the face of spaceflight. AI is still too early in its development to know what the dangers of permissionless innovation might be. Despite the hype, AI and AGI, or artificial general intelligence, are still little more than algorithms that are smart within their constrained domains, but have little agency beyond this. Yet the pace of development and the increasing synergies between cybernetic substrates, coding, robotics, and bio-based and bio-inspired systems are such that the boundaries separating what is possible and what is not are shifting rapidly. And here, there is deep concern that innovation with no thought consequences could lead to irreversible and potentially catastrophic outcomes. In Ex Machina, Nathan echoes many other fictitious innovators in this book. John Hammond in Jurassic Park in Chapter 2, Lamar Burgess in Minority Report in Chapter 4, the creators of NZT and Limitless in Chapter 5, Will Castor in Transcendence that's coming in Chapter 9, and others. Like these innovators, he considers himself above social constraints, and he has the resources to act on this. Money buys him the freedom to do what he wants, and what he wants is to create an AI like no one has ever seen before. As we discover, Nathan realizes there are risks involved in his enterprise, and he's smart enough to put safety measures in place to manage them. It may not even be a coincidence that Ava comes into being hundreds of miles from civilization, surrounded by a natural barrier to prevent her escaping into the world of people. In the approaches he takes, Nathan's actions help establish the idea that permissionless innovation isn't necessarily reckless innovation. Rather, it's innovation that's conducted in a way that the person doing it thinks is responsible. It's just that in Nathan's case, the person who decides what is responsible is clearly someone who hasn't thought beyond the limits of his own ego. This in itself reveals a fundamental challenge with such unbounded technological experimentation. With the best will in the world, a single innovator cannot see the broader context within which they're operating. They're constrained by their understanding and mindset. They, like all of us, are trapped in their own version of Plato's cave, where what they believe is reality is merely their interpretation of shadows cast on the walls of their mind. But unlike Plato's prisoners, they have the ability to create technologies that can and will have an impact beyond this cave. And to extend the metaphor further, they have the ability to create technologies that are able to see the cave for what it is and to use this to their advantage. This may all sound rather melodramatic, and maybe it is. Yet perhaps Nathan's biggest downfall is that he had no translator between himself and a bigger reality. He had no enlightened philosopher to guide his thinking and reveal to him greater truths about his work and its potential impacts. To the contrary, in his hubris, he sees himself as the enlightened philosopher, and in doing so, he becomes mesmerized and misled by shadow ideas dancing across the wall of his intellect. This broader reality that Nathan misses is one where messy, complex people live together in a messy, complex society with messy, complex relationships with the technologies they depend on. Nathan is tech-savvy, but socially ignorant. And as it turns out, he is utterly naive when it comes to the emergent social abilities of Ava. He succeeds in creating a being that occupies a world that he cannot understand, and as a result, he cannot anticipate. Things might have turned out very differently if Nathan had worked with others, and if he'd surrounded himself with people who are adept at seeing the world as he could not. In this case, instead of succumbing to the lure of permissionless innovation, he might have accepted that sometimes constraints and permissions are necessary. Of course, if he'd done this, Ex Machina wouldn't have been the compelling movie it is. But as a story about the emergence of enlightened AI, Ex Machina is a salutary reminder that sometimes we need other people to help guide us along pathways towards responsible innovation. There is a glitch in this argument, however, and that's the reality that without a gung-ho attitude towards innovation like Nathan's, the pace of innovation and the potential good that it brings would be much, much slower. And while I'm sure that some would welcome this, many would be saddened to see a slowing down of the process turning today's dreams into tomorrow's realities.